In Avatar: The Last Airbender, we meet a very troubled and very flawed young man, a banished prince bent on restoring his lost honor by capturing the saviour of the world and delivering him to the Fire Nation. This man is, of course, Prince Zuko of the Fire Nation. When we first meet Zuko, he seems to be a standard villain for a fantasy adventure television series. Big scar, bad temper, and scary fire powers. But after a few episodes, it becomes clear that this supposed villain isn't as two-dimensional as he first appears. We learn that when he was younger, he spoke out of turn during a war meeting with his father. The Firelord took this as a form of disrespect and challenged the young prince to an agni, a firebending duel. Zuko refused to fight his father and begged his forgiveness. But Firelord Ozai only saw this as a sign of weakness, something near unforgivable in his eyes. For this, he scarred the young prince and banished him from his home nation until he could capture the Avatar. Zuko, above all, is a character of mistakes. He's a character who is wrong on multiple occasions and makes mistake after mistake after mistake. It isn't until we're midway through the final season that Zuko finally overcomes this and joins the gang to help take down the Firelord. A lot of people love Zuko's story arc because it's a very well structured and well paced redemption arc, something that's not really easy to pull off to this level of quality. I also really enjoy the moments where Zuko's goodness shines through and comes to the surface, but what really intrigues me more than anything else are his failures. I find his lowest moments fascinating, not because I like seeing a well-written character suffer and struggle, but because I resonate with all of Zuko's mistakes. I find that looking at these mistakes is almost like holding up a mirror. We see the darkest parts of ourselves and others reflected back at us through the lens of this character. Zuko makes many mistakes throughout the series, from minor ones like trusting pirates or angering a narcissistic Fire Nation admiral, to major ones like betraying Katara and his uncle during the exact moment they needed him to prove himself. Even when he tries to do the right thing by joining Aang and the group, he still makes a mess of it when he accidentally hurts Toph and admits to sending an assassin after them. I could literally fill a video with all of the mistakes Zuko makes, but that's not really the point here. I want to take a moment to look at the nature of mistakes, both for Zuko and in terms of our own lives in the real world. Why do we fear being wrong so much? What makes us avoid failure at every opportunity? And what is it about mistakes that are actually good for you? I recently read a book by American psychologist Carol Dweck called Mindset: The New Psychology of Success. In it, she illustrates that there are two different mindsets that people will embody, even from a very young age. One mindset is the fixed mindset. People with a fixed mindset place value on their abilities. They consider themselves to either be smart or dumb, and believe that these traits are a core component of who they are and ultimately are unchangeable. People with a fixed mindset believe that they have a particular set of abilities and that nothing can change this. If you're a child prodigy, you always consider yourself to be naturally talented and will carry that attitude on to adulthood. If you're a naturally gifted athlete, you believe you have a specific set of skills endowed upon you naturally and will pursue athletic careers based on that skill set. This, at first, sounds great. Who wouldn't want to have a lot of confidence in their abilities? If anything, the big problem nowadays is a lack of confidence in most people. But there is a downside to having a fixed mindset. If you place so much value on your abilities, you begin to associate your capabilities with your sense of self. This means that if you make a mistake or mess up in some way, it's not that you just didn't achieve your goal this time, but that you, as a person, are a failure. If you fail at something, it becomes a personal admission that you aren't good enough as a human being. This results in people with a fixed mindset generally avoiding anything that could potentially result in failure. It's better to take on a challenge that's easy and guaranteed to be a success than to actually challenge yourself and risk failure. I'm sure we've all had a boss or a manager that refused to take risks or change their ways. A boss that never tried to innovate or change up processes in an attempt to streamline or improve. A boss that would pin the blame on others whenever there was a problem and would never take accountability for the issue. This is another perfect example of someone with a fixed mindset. It's not necessarily related to skill, but rather whether a person sees failure at something they should be competent at as a blemish on their personal worth. Even if the boss is good at their job, they will inevitably fall short of a boss at another company who is willing to take risks and challenge themselves. Those with a fixed mindset won't even try, because the mere act of trying or practicing is a direct risk of failure. The other mindset is called the growth mindset. The growth mindset is, as you've likely guessed, the total opposite of the fixed mindset. Where those with a fixed mindset value themselves based on not failing, those with a growth mindset value themselves based on growing and learning from failure. Someone with a growth mindset might make 1,000 attempts at something and fail each time, but despite all the failure, they brush themselves off and keep going. Why? Not because they're masochistic, but because they see the value in learning from past mistakes. They take risks and put themselves out there. They're willing to risk failure precisely because they don't see it as having any bearing on their self-worth. Consider all the great innovators and achievers. Almost all of them were people with a growth mindset. Thomas Edison tried and failed multiple times at getting a commercially viable light bulb to work. He didn't see every failure as a blemish on his own worth, but saw each as an example of something that didn't work. He used his failures to teach himself what not to do. Or consider someone like Michael Jordan. Instead of just believing he was a naturally talented athlete, he spent hours upon hours training and pushing himself. He practiced dunks and free throws thousands of times, probably failing most of them. Each attempt taught him more and more of what didn't work, so that he could hone in on what did work. The growth mindset tells you to actively seek out challenges where you could fail, not because you somehow enjoy the sharp sting of making a mistake, but because nothing teaches as well as failure does. For example, you could read about archery and meticulously study all the intricacies of succeeding and hitting the target all day. But until you actually get on the range and miss a couple hundred times, you'll never really get good at hitting the bullseye. The growth mindset teaches you that failure is important, because it is the only way the human mind really learns. Clearly, the growth mindset is the healthier and better option between the two. I'd much rather accept regular failure in return for constant improvement than have a crippling fear of even messing up once. And luckily, you can choose the mindset you wish to have. You're not stuck with one over the other. You have a choice. It just depends on which mindset you choose to cultivate. Unfortunately, most of us go through the modern education system. Anyone that has gone through it will be able to tell you that it is a horrible way to learn. Students are constantly appraised on their current ability with no room for error. If you mess up once, that grade is stuck with you for the rest of the year, likely bringing down your grade point average. There's no chance to learn from your failures, because failing means you're a bad student. You get that big red F as a bright badge of shame, and never really get to try again. You're expected to conform to a one-size-fits-all approach to learning, and if you don't adapt well, you're branded a failure. A stark contrast to the smart kids at the front of the class who just seem to somehow get it. Why even bother studying? You'll just fail anyway. It's a travesty that we put children through these government institutions that not only break their spirits, but also warp their mindset for the rest of their lives. Luckily, with the advent of the internet, we can now learn almost anything. But fixing one's mindset is a prerequisite to success, and undoing years of indoctrination isn't easy. Take an example from my life. For years, I had a fixed mindset on my weight. I believed I had poor genetics and couldn't do anything about it. But only after I changed the way I thought did I have the drive and determination to take action and change my situation. I had to take myself from a fixed mindset state to a growth mindset state before I could even begin to get healthier and work on my fitness. And like I said, this mindset shift isn't easy due to how most of us are taught by the modern education system. For the vast majority of human history, we didn't learn in classrooms. We were apprentices to masters of a craft and learned how to perfect a skill through trial and error under the watchful eye of a skilled artisan. We adapted a growth mindset naturally, since failure was a natural part of learning during these apprenticeships. The modern classroom is a system that is barely 150 years old, and it applies a one-size-fits-all model to education. The goal isn't to help you find what you're passionate about and to teach you how to master your natural proclivities. The goal is to turn you into a perfect employee drone for the workforce you'll eventually be entering. Anyway, I got off on a bit of a tangent, but the point I'm trying to make is that failure is a good and natural part of learning. The only reason you struggle to move over to a growth mindset is because of years of indoctrination. Don't be hard on yourself if you struggle to make a transition at first. It takes some time, but it's definitely worth it. Now, I know some of you may be disagreeing with me here. You might believe that people should take failure seriously. After all, there are some things you just can't do over and over again to practice. And some people are just very talented and thus deserve their revered status in society above us plebeians. Trying to embrace failure is just a recipe for a crushed sense of self-worth. The growth mindset isn't something to naturally be pursued, is it? Well, what if I told you that failure is a natural part of being human? Meaning it's in our DNA to fail over and over again. Failure is the best and natural way for our brains to learn. Back during the earliest days of human life, we didn't really have access to teachers or learning materials. Back when we were mere hunter-gatherer tribes on the African plains, we didn't have the luxury of getting survivalist training before we went out into the world. Humans had to fight and push and scrape their way to survival every day. We didn't get taught how to make fire, we had to teach ourselves. And unless you've tried making fire the old-fashioned way with 2 sticks and a lot of friction, you might not realize just how much of an arduous process it is. Very clearly, there must have been many mistakes along the way to humans mastering fire. The same goes for things like making hunting weapons like a spear. How many generations of trial and error did it take to learn how to make a straight spear with a sharp end? One that was aerodynamic enough to be thrown straight, yet light enough to be thrown long distances. One that would penetrate tough hide deeply enough without breaking. And then consider the countless attempts at using these spears in an actual hunt. The amount of failed throws and missed targets. The amount of hungry nights spent without food because the prey got away. Now consider more advanced things like planting crops for agriculture. Learning to water and care for a plant without it dying on you before it was ready to harvest. Or how about making clothes from cloth and fabric? The amount of times the thread would break or unravel before they mastered turning it into clothing that would actually withstand the outside elements whilst being worn. Humans have mastered the art of adaptation. Unlike other animals, we can be found literally anywhere on Earth. Even on Earth's most inhospitable environments, where very few animals even survive, you'll find traces of humanity. We are adaptation machines built to survive and thrive anywhere. But the process of manipulating our environment to our benefit isn't something instinctual like walking and talking. It's not something we just magically know right out of our mother's womb. We learn to adapt our environment through constant trial and error. We owe our very position as the apex predator to the fact that we've mastered the art of learning from failure. We don't naturally adapt, but we do naturally look back on our past wins and losses. We can naturally observe or learn about the past successes and failures of others. And with the ability to think about and analyze these past successes and failures, we are able to naturally learn from them and adapt accordingly. Humans naturally have a growth mindset. We just also have psychological blocks that will push us into a fixed mindset at times. But funnily enough, this ability to switch over into a fixed mindset isn't some mistake in our evolutionary programming. It's actually a feature, not a bug. You see, a fixed mindset comes about because a person fears their own personal worth being devalued. And this happens when a person fails in full view of others who can then call them a failure. It's essentially a byproduct of our socialization. Back in our hunter-gatherer days, being socially ostracized was literally a death sentence. Nowadays, if you're pushed out of a group, you most likely will have just lost a couple of friends or acquaintances. But back then, when the only way to survive was to work together as a group, being kicked out into the unforgiving wilderness was literally to be pronounced dead. You had no way of surviving long-term alone at all. So humans developed a natural aversion to being disliked or seen in a negative way. Any negative social attention was a potential indication of being ostracized from your tribe. And while we don't live on the African plains anymore, our DNA doesn't know that. The environment has changed, but the human machine hasn't. We still have all the same hardware now as we did back then. So, if you're someone who is especially sensitive to the cues of negative social consequences, or if you have experienced negative social attention in the past for actions you took, you're far more likely to develop a fixed mindset. It's much safer socially to remain in the role that you've been pegged in by the group than to try new things and risk failure. The hunter that tried and failed multiple times with their new version of a spear ended up being a very poor hunter. And very poor hunters became drains on the tribe resources. It was easier and safer for the tribe to kick them out than to hope their experimentation eventually paid off. The fixed mindset is essentially a defense mechanism. If you failed a couple hundred times in the past, your brain would rather default to not trying, especially if you were scolded, mocked, or somehow shunned for your failure. But if you were praised for your effort, or if you succeeded before your failures began to cause negative social consequences, your brain wouldn't have to go into defense mode. You would begin to develop a growth mindset more, with each success proving to your brain that all the failures are worth it. So what, should we just avoid judging people altogether? Should we only praise effort no matter how many times someone fails? Well, we could probably stand to be a bit more supportive of one another, that's for sure. Especially if the person failing is clearly putting in a lot of earnest effort. But no, I don't believe that judgment is bad. In fact, it's a necessary part of human socialization. Judgment teaches us what is or isn't acceptable in society. It teaches us what is good for us over what is bad for us. It's a natural way for us to learn how to act for our own benefit and for the benefit of the group. As an example, let's look at obese people. And before I begin with this simplified example, no, I'm not trying to say that obese people are lesser or bad in any way. As someone who has struggled with weight his whole life, I know the struggles of dealing with weight gain. Obesity is not healthy and is something I'm actively working on in my life. I encourage anyone who struggles with their weight to keep on pushing and keep on fighting the good fight. And if you're struggling to make progress, remember to see it in terms of the growth mindset. It helps. Anyway, back to the example. Just like the ability to switch to a fixed mindset is a feature and not a bug, so is the ability to store fat. Back when food was scarce, having fat stores was a literal lifesaver. But with food being so abundant nowadays, we still easily fall into the trap of overeating and gaining a ton of weight. The social mechanisms of judging overweight people is not because people as a collective get some kind of kick out of mocking the fat person. It's because being obese is not only very detrimental to one's health, but back when food was scarce, it was also an indication of someone who ate more than their fair share. Now, maybe this person was the top hunter, or his mate, and thus would have been seen to deserve a larger cut. But if it got to the point of excess weight gain, social pressures and judgment would step in as a countermeasure from the group. Not only was there a risk of some getting more at the expense of others, but it also risked the performance of the tribe as a whole, since overweight people aren't as physically fit as others. Social measures like this are a much safer way of dealing with the matter than confronting your prize hunter directly. It's a lot more complex than that, and I use something very basic and simple to make the example, but judgment in society is generally a good thing. Unfortunately, we no longer live in small tribes. Judgment doesn't come from close family and friends that want the best for you. Judgment now comes from outside forces. While people on the internet may not personally know you and are kept anonymous, allowing them to be even more vitriolic in their remarks, the human brain can't tell the difference. We just see the judgment and feel the anxiety it brings. Unless we actively learn to ignore it, our monkey brains will just take it at face value and begin to panic. For those of us who grew up in an era before social media, this may be easier to do since our formative years were filled with face-to-face socialization. There's a tangible difference to our brains when we interact with a person online over a person in real life. We're not impervious to online judgment, but we do seem to manage it a bit better. But for those in the younger generation, especially those who had access to a phone and social media before puberty, the internet is where they learn to socialize. Our younger generations are growing up on social media, so while they can cognitively make the distinction between real life and the internet, in practicality, their hindbrain sees the internet judgment on the same level as real life judgment. We've taken a social mechanism that once signaled potential social shunning, and thus potential death, multiplied it by 100 through the power of the internet and easy technological access, and shoved it into the hands of our youngest and most vulnerable developing minds. Prince Zuko was a massive failure in the eyes of his father. He bore the brunt of being literally banished by his own tribe and by the one parent who he was never able to get the approval of. For it, he underwent years of pain, suffering, and mental anguish as he tried to come to terms with what he perceived to be the biggest blemish on his standing within the social order of his time. You see, just as Zuko was constantly seeking to restore his honor, so do we in our modern age. In Zuko's world, honor was a social construct of how a prince of the Fire Nation should act. It was a standard that he felt he failed to live up to. And he believed that if he could only do as his father wanted, his honor would be restored. We in the modern world also have our own form of honor, and it manifests itself as a persona we put on when we're online. We avoid saying the wrong thing or making a mistake on social media because our virtual honor is on the line. It might not seem the same as what Zuko had to deal with, but in practice it is. Zuko was shunned by those he loved and by his own country. If we dishonor ourselves on social media, we too get shunned by the people we value in some way. We too get kicked out of communities that once felt like home to us. Honor was once something local and cultural, but we're an ever-globalizing species. We're forming our own online cultures, and local can now take on the added meaning of your online community or tribe. Thus, there is an unofficial code of honor in all these online spaces. Like Zuko had to deal with the standard of honor in his own culture, we now need to deal with our own standards of honor in our online cultures. Social media is an example of where these codes of honor become focused and enforced, sometimes, unfortunately, in the worst possible ways. Don't get me wrong though, social media is an amazing invention. I think it has done more good for the human race than we are able to realize just yet. But social media is a tool, and a tool can be used for both bad or good. Just as social media has improved the lives of countless people, it has also ruined the lives of countless people. Some like to say that social media has made us worse, but I believe all it has done is actually expose us in some way. Without the social consequences of being seen as a nasty, vindictive, angry person who just takes delight in pointing out the very flaws in others, we've been able to let the negative side of our human nature run amok. We can hide behind an anonymous avatar and socially attack anyone we want to. In real life, an arsehole always runs the risk of being smacked upside the head for being a dick. Online, the consequences are a lot less immediate or severe. Social media has allowed us to amplify our voices and reach out to more people than ever before. But it has also allowed us to use those amplified voices and greater reach as a way to harm others. Especially those who are more vulnerable, like adolescents and young teenagers who are just beginning to learn the intricacies of human socialization. Maybe a young kid could read a mean comment and forget about it in an hour later when they're watching a funny cat video. And that's if they even really understood what the troll was trying to say. But a teenager will almost definitely put a lot of weight behind that comment and internalize it a lot more. To teenagers, social hierarchies becomes everything, and thus social pressures and judgment carries a lot more weight. So what do we do? Ban mean people from social media sites? As a free speech absolutist, I don't think that's the best approach. Sure, it's technically up to the social media site to make the call of who to ban or not, but I believe that banning should be used more for spam than anything else. Besides, banning or censoring people just causes more people to pay attention and galvanizes one group against another. Cancel culture is a well-known part of the internet, and it hasn't really resulted in a more peaceful society. Instead, it's just caused a wider and more devastating social divide. So, how do we deal with it? People aren't just magically going to stop being assholes online just because some people are genuinely being mentally affected by it. And unfortunately, both sides of the argument will generally believe that they are the right ones. There's a special kind of hubris that overcomes us online. We believe that our views are the only right ones and that any dissenting opinion is just someone else who is stupid or uninformed. We're the enlightened ones who have to share our wisdom with the world and brutally knock down anyone who disagrees. for the benefit of society, of course. So how do we even begin to deal with this issue if banning and censorship has only made the problem worse? Well, first of all, it's probably not a good idea to let your child grow up on social media unsupervised. But the issue of child rearing in the internet age is a whole different topic. Let's look at a different, practical way for those of us who aren't kids to deal with social media shitstorms. While he did it in an unhealthy way, Zuko held himself responsible for his actions. He didn't blame all the people of the Fire Nation for his banishment. He didn't scorn the world for wronging him unfairly. He didn't even blame his father, the one who was actually responsible for his banishment, for the actions that took place. He took personal action and sought to regain his honor in the best way he knew how. Now, he did go about it in the wrong way at first, and it took many mistakes and lapses in judgment for him to finally get on the right path. But he always placed responsibility on himself, rather than expecting others to conform to his expectation of reality. Just as Zuko took action to restore his honor, we too must take personal action to improve our interactions online. We too must find a way to breach the gap between us and those who shun us. There is a better way of handling these situations than pointing the finger and blaming others. There's a better way of dealing with these problems than asking for the banning or censorship of those we disagree with. The best way, in my opinion, is to look at it through the lens of the ancient Stoics. If you haven't seen my video where I announced my return to YouTube, I briefly explained that while I'm not religious, I do have a philosophy of life that acts as my own ethical and moral compass. This philosophy is the ancient philosophical school of Stoicism. The Stoics believe that you can't control others and that all you can control is your own thoughts and actions. Thus, if someone is being a dick online, you need to understand and accept that no matter what you say, you aren't going to be able to change their mind. The change has to come from their side. This is the principle of the dichotomy of control. The dichotomy of control teaches us that by worrying over the things that are not within your control, you have set yourself up for more stress, worry, and anxiety, as you have no way of resolving the problem. Thus, you must focus on what you do control, since this is what will bring you peace, stability, and calm, even in the face of immense hardship. What is in your control are your thoughts and your actions. What is not in your control is literally everything else in life and the world. You can't control what is to come in the future, what happened in the past, or what other people are doing right now. You can't control the fact that there is war and famine and pain and strife in the world. None of these things are things that any sane person would want or prefer, but they are unfortunately a part of life on Earth. Nature is brutal, and even though we live in comfortable urban cities or towns, we are still part of nature, and we still have a nature within ourselves. Nothing can change that. Being upset over these things would be like getting upset at the rising sun. No matter how unpleasant, it is a part of nature and thus inevitable. People will be shitty and do shitty things. Such is life. But what you can control are your own thoughts and your actions. You can choose to focus on preparing for struggles and failures as best as you can. You can choose to take actions that will help you weather the storms of life. You can take small actions that will give you a sense of calm and control in all of this chaos. So, if you encounter someone online or in real life that's being mean or overly judgmental, do not take it to heart. If you can manage to separate yourself from the other person and realize that there is nothing you can do to control that person, it becomes much easier to deal with hate and anger. If there's nothing you can do to prevent it, then you might as well focus on what you can control, your thoughts and actions, and either block the person, turn off notifications, or just step away from the internet for a while. If it's in real life, you can walk away, ignore them, or actively choose not to let their words affect you. Your peace of mind is, ultimately, in your own hands. I could go more into detail about the dichotomy of control, but I recommend you look into it yourself, since it takes a while to internalize it to the point of achieving a regular state of calm and peace. But there is another aspect of Stoicism that helps me navigate the muddied waters of social media spats. And before I get into a further explanation, I take the Stoic approach here, but you need not embrace Stoicism as your own personal life philosophy. You can be a Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, atheist, or anything else and still make use of these principles and tools. Take what is useful to you and discard what isn't. Now, the other aspect of Stoicism that has helped me not only deal with people online but also with people in real life are what we call the 4 virtues. These virtues are the 4 ideals by which we Stoics live our lives. The ancient Stoics believed that a truly happy and fulfilling life can only be found by pursuing these virtues and avoiding their opposites, which are the 4 vices. Thus, even if you're a billionaire or a beggar on the street, you can lead a good and happy life by living according to virtue and valuing what virtue brings to your life. The 4 virtues are wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance or self-control. So, how do these virtues help you deal with not only social media brigades but also with failure and mistakes in life? I'll take it one virtue at a time, but I will try to keep it brief. The virtue of wisdom teaches us to learn from our past and from others. It teaches us to take practical knowledge and apply it to any applicable situation that calls for it. So, if you've made a mistake or failed in some way, you need to realize that failure is merely a way for the human brain to learn and improve. And when someone on social media or in real life judges you or tries to verbally attack you for something you said or did, you need only realize that it's likely a very sad and unhappy person who finds joy in attacking other people. You can block or mute them or even walk away, but they have no more control over your life than you allow them. The virtue of courage teaches us to face our fears and struggles, no matter how difficult it may seem. It doesn't say that you have no fear, but rather that you will stand up and face your fears head on, no matter how scary it may seem at the time. So, if you have a failure you regret, or you fear future failure, realize you can only face it if you embrace courage. Facing your mistakes is something almost nobody does these days. So, by simply being willing to face it and learn from it, you're being braver than most people would ever dare being. And when some asshole on the internet or social media tries to attack you over something, you can face them with courage too. Most people fear social backlash or cancel squads because they fear being ostracized. Realize that by facing internet hate, you're standing up to something that entire corporations and even politicians regularly cave into. You'd be braver than every single one of them. The virtue of justice can most easily be explained by the golden rule. Treat others as you wish to be treated. By not taking part in social media or real-life attacks, you actively stand against this cultural rot that has harmed and hurt so many people. By praising people for effort rather than berating them for failure, you're actively helping cultivate the growth mindset in others, just as you're cultivating it in yourself. Justice also means standing up for others when you see them being ganged up on for making their own mistakes. Even if you dislike or disagree with them, it doesn't mean that they deserve to be dogpiled. So stand up for them, even if it seems difficult. And finally, the virtue of temperance teaches us to control ourselves and not give in to excess or to deprive ourselves of what is essential. So when you fail, give yourself a healthy dose of criticism. See where you can improve, commit to doing so, and move on. But also remember to praise and reward yourself for taking action and putting in effort. Become your own biggest cheerleader. And when it comes to social media, avoid forming part of pointless arguments over things that ultimately do not matter. Not only will you likely not change any minds, but you'll also avoid being drawn into being part of an angry hate mob yourself. And where you see someone lashing out for no reason, respond with kindness. Not for their benefit, but for your own. Temperance is the virtue of self-control. So use that control to avoid becoming the very thing you would defend others against. As I said, these are merely the principles I choose to live by, and you don't have to become a practicing Stoic in order to apply these lessons and ideals to your life. You can take the tools that work for you and discard what doesn't. And while I'm not always perfect and slip up from time to time, I do try to hold to these ideals as best as I can. I firmly believe that the world would be a better place if we held principles that helped us become a better person, rather than expecting others to adhere to our standards of right and wrong. Constantly pointing the finger at others whilst refusing to look inward and hold yourself to a higher standard is a recipe for a divided and broken society. Now, I know this whole social media section was a bit of a tangent from our main topic of failure and mistakes, but I felt it was something important that needed to be addressed. It has major relevance to the idea of mistakes and failure in our modern society. More often than not, we get attacked more on social media for mistakes than in real life, which just ends up pushing us more into a fixed mindset. Social media is the modern town square, and an increasing majority of human interaction occurs online. We can no longer see it as separate to human socialization and need to see it as part of how we communicate, especially since now it leaves all our past mistakes and failures open for others to see and comment on. The internet, as they say, never forgets. Maybe you said something someone else disagreed with. Maybe you did something that seemed dumb or idiotic to someone else. Regardless of the reason for being attacked, learning how to deal with the hate and not letting it affect you is a vital skill in an age where so much social interaction happens on these online platforms. It's a skill that should be taught to all people, in my opinion, since I believe it would make us all a little more level-headed and nicer to one another. But getting back to the topic of making mistakes and being wrong, I do believe there is inherent value in making mistakes. There is beauty in being wrong about things, provided you learn from the experience, of course. So, what can we learn from our mistakes? What value is there in actually being wrong or making mistakes in life? One need only look at Zuko's character arc to see how failure, mistakes, and being wrong can actually be a net positive at the end. Zuko made every mistake possible in life, yet his life still turned out better for it. He got scarred and banished by his own father, betrayed by the only person in life who was really there for him, and then actively committed treason against his country. Most people in his life would have called all of these actions mistakes, but in the end, he turned out to be a happier and more fulfilled person for it, not to mention the fact that he had an active hand in saving the world as well. There's a genuine value in making mistakes. Mistakes obviously can't be made intentionally. It's only when we look back on them that we consider them mistakes. But it's the value judgments we place on these mistakes that make all the difference. If you fail at something or end up saying something that turned out to be wrong, do you beat yourself up over it? Do you let it consume you and hang over you like a dark shadow? Or do you acknowledge your error, learn from the situation, and use that information to improve yourself and grow as a person? Do you have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? So often we get told or tell ourselves that being wrong or failing is somehow negative. But failure isn't negative or positive. Failure just is. It's a neutral fact of life. And it's up to us as individuals to decide whether we make the experience a negative or positive one. The first and most obvious benefit of being wrong or making a mistake is learning from it. As we've already covered, there's no better teacher in nature than failure. Failure teaches harsh, but it teaches well. Not only do you get direct feedback on what the wrong course of action was, but the experience becomes much more ingrained in your memory than just learning something from a textbook or some other medium. Sure, having mentors or the right information helps a lot. I definitely prefer educating myself and getting proper guidance over failing. It's not only more efficient, but also avoids all the unpleasant consequences of being wrong or making a mistake. But you can only learn so much from external sources. Life is not a textbook, and you can only really get so far without actual practical experience. You can only spend so long in the world of the theoretical before you need to go into the world of the practical. And the world of the practical always carries the risk of failure, no matter how much you learned and prepared ahead of time. So when I fail or when I'm wrong about something, I try to always find the lesson in it. Does it make the pain any easier? A little bit. What it does do, though, is make me stronger and smarter. I could choose to ignore the lesson and blame the world for my problems, or I could take responsibility and learn from my past so that I may have a better future. Zuko made many mistakes and nearly paid the ultimate price for it multiple times. And just when things were looking up for him and Iroh in Ba Sing Se, he caved in and decided to betray Iroh for a chance at redeeming his honor. It took some time, but he eventually learned that this was a mistake and that his new life didn't bring fulfillment. But did he just wallow in shame and guilt for the rest of his life? No. He got up, dusted himself off, and learned from the situation. He then took action with his new knowledge and perspective by joining the Avatar to restore balance to the world. Failure is only failure if you do not learn from it. You've only made a mistake if you did not use your blunders to improve yourself. Beyond just learning, another great benefit to failure is personal growth. This isn't the same as learning and attacking your problem from a different angle. This is a deeper, more personal form of development. You can learn a lot of practical things from making mistakes, yes, but mistakes do more than bringing you pure knowledge. Mistakes also, over time, bring you a deep sense of wisdom. There is a whole discussion to be had on what exactly constitutes wisdom. For our purposes, however, wisdom simply means having the life experience to know when and how to apply your practical knowledge. Being informed is great, but it means nothing if you don't know when or how to apply it to your life. To make another example of Zuko, look at his life and perspective after joining the Avatar. He had a lot of practical knowledge and experience from his past mistakes. He was a more competent warrior and a skilled teacher. But it was thanks to his wisdom that he sought out the true nature of firebending. He used his wisdom to draw his firebending not from anger and rage, but from his deeper determination and strength. He learns that fire isn't just destruction, but it's also life. I can't imagine the Zuko from the first season gaining this level of insight. The Zuko who single-mindedly pursued the Avatar to the point of getting himself stuck in a blizzard would never have the wisdom needed to seek firebending's true source. But Zuko, in the final season, has gained enough wisdom to be able to internalize and accept this new perspective on the nature of his martial art. You too, like Zuko, should aim to use your knowledge gained from failure and turn it into wisdom. Let me make an example from my own life that may be more fitting to some of you. When I was a teenager, I was told to never do drugs of any kind. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't do weed, avoid mind-altering substances wherever possible. Now, do you think I listened? Of course I didn't. I was a teenager. While I never touched tobacco, I did drink and I did smoke a lot of weed. In fact, I even continued into my adult years. It was a mistake on my part, and I failed to avoid falling into that trap. I knew I was making a mistake and not living up to my potential. I had the practical knowledge that drinking or smoking would only dull my mind, rob me of productivity, and make me feel terrible afterwards. But it was only after making the mistake multiple times that I gained the wisdom to avoid those mistakes and learn moderation. Now I can let myself drink without getting completely hammered, but I only really do so at social events. I can smoke without getting high out of my mind, but once again, I only partake in the company of friends or on rare occasions. And that's only if I decide to do it, since I generally prefer not to, unless it's a very special occasion. I'm not saying you should avoid these things, since it's your life and your mistakes to make. I don't believe in telling you what you can and can't do with your own body anyway. What I am saying, though, is that learning the wisdom of moderation and self-control only came to me after multiple mistakes. Perhaps there are mistakes in your life that you used to make, but only after knocking your head on the same branch a couple times did you learn how to avoid it and gain wisdom from it. I can now apply my self-control to more areas than just substance usage, even if that's where I learned it from. I'm able to stick to healthy eating more easily. I can make myself exercise even on days I don't feel like it. And I can avoid things that are unhealthy or bad for me even if I crave it. All thanks to my new sense of self-control. In the same way, you'll gain certain insights of wisdom that you can apply to different areas and times in your own life. And finally, mistakes and failure also bring something that very few other things in life can give you. It brings humility and a deep appreciation for other people and their flaws. It's easy to judge people, and as I said earlier, I do think judgment is a healthy human social convention. But too often we become overly judgmental. Too often we take one flaw about a person, blow it out of proportion, and judge a person's entire self-worth on that one issue. It's easy to see other people as dumber or less informed when they say things that are wrong or that you disagree with. It's easy to consider yourself superior to others in certain aspects when you best them in an argument or in some other display of skill or prestige. But what isn't easy is reminding yourself that you are just as much a flawed human and just as susceptible to mistakes and being wrong. Nothing about you makes you better or smarter or stronger or more virtuous than others. Perhaps you've learned more and made more mistakes to learn from in the past, yes. But just because someone else doesn't have the same past and same mistakes to draw from doesn't lessen them in any way. And it certainly doesn't increase your own personal worth in any way. Failure and mistakes, when you learn from them, and apply the lessons they bring are one of the best ways to humble yourself. You learn a deep sense of humility and realize that all humans are just flawed beings trying to make their way in this ever-changing world. And with this humility comes a deeper love, admiration, and respect for your fellow man. Due to my past mistakes and failures, I now find myself having a lot more patience than I once did. I don't get frustrated with others as easily as I used to. I appreciate the company of friends and family more than ever. And when I disagree with someone or see them do something wrong or fail in any way, I remind myself not to judge them too harshly. Marcus Aurelius, one of the best known of the ancient Stoics, once said that we should be strict with ourselves and lenient with others. He also said that if we find ourselves amongst people we disagree with or stand opposed to, that we should either teach them or tolerate them. If we keep ourselves to a strict standard and aim to either teach others or tolerate their flaws, we'll find ourselves being much more appreciative of the other people we encounter in life. Humans are social creatures, and so we should do our best to get along with our fellow man. Learn to appreciate both the strengths and flaws of others. And nothing helps you realize this humility and appreciation like the harsh taskmaster that is failure. There is a definite beauty in failure and being wrong. In many ways, it is our messy, human way of learning from the world around us. In other ways, it is a way for us to grow and develop as people. And in yet another way, it is a method by which we better come to understand and tolerate our human brothers and sisters. When we fail, it's not a judgment on our worth as people. When we make mistakes, it is not an indication of our inadequacies or shortcomings. When we are wrong, it is not a display of our stupidity or lack of knowledge. Mistakes and failure are the feedback mechanisms by which we learn and grow. One need only be willing to learn from it. One need only be willing to adopt a growth mindset. You can fail all your life without being a failure, but doing so is up to the action you take and the path you choose to go down. So when you fail, remember the story of Zuko. Remember that even if you make all the biggest mistakes in the world, it doesn't mean the end of you. Zuko hurt those he loved and turned his back on the very people he was meant to protect. But Zuko also rose from the ashes of his failures. Zuko used his errors to his advantage and grew as a person because of it. So do not fear failure. Cherish it. Be like Zuko and rise from the ashes of your own mistakes. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate the time you've given me in watching this video. If you enjoyed it and would like to support the channel in some way, consider hitting the like button and subscribing, since that tells YouTube to promote it and share this video with more people. And if there's any failures or mistakes that you're struggling with or learned from, why don't you let me know in the comments? I'd love to talk and lend a sympathetic ear wherever I can. And if there's enough feedback in the comments, I might make a response video to try and address any valuable points you guys bring up. Anyway, take care and we'll talk again very soon.